There we go. We are in just the midst of this conversation. We call it Closing the Loop. It's kind of paralleling the experience you get if you have an Apple Watch or an iPhone. These kind of processes of tracking progress. That's what those rings and those symbols represent. If you've got an Apple Watch or if you've got an iPhone, it tracks things like calories burnt, like exercise done, steps taken. And we've been drawing like some parallel lines here about some maturity thresholds that we hope we all can like see ourselves kind of rising to the occasion as we investigate and look at all the invitations that Jesus makes for us, all the ways of Jesus that we're invited to follow through the New Testament. And today we're in the conversation about grace, which last week we talked about mercy. And if you were here last week was a good but hard talk on the entity that is mercy and how challenging that can be for humanity. It goes against our grain. It goes against the flow, especially when we've felt wronged or we have felt personally hurt or attacked, or maybe one of our loved ones have been hurt or attacked. Mercy is not like what flows naturally out of humanity without the presence of Jesus. And even with the presence of Jesus, it's challenging to be someone who delivers the idea of mercy. Today, we're going to talk about grace. And if grace was the requirement for all of humanity, I don't know that any of us would graduate or make the cut. I'm going to tell you a story about a place I call the Mirage. The Mirage is, I don't even think that's its official name. I gave it the name the Mirage because I only went there one time in my life, and going there, I had a terrible experience, and I never went there again. When I was in my late teens, early 20s, when my dad's parents were still alive in Mexico, we used to go up and down the coast. I would go to school here in San Diego. I went to Grossmont High School. And on free days or free afternoons, I would load up my single cab Toyota pickup with two friends, and we would dot the coast in Baja from Rosarito all the way down to Ensenada, looking for unsurfed, not touched coastland so that we could like ride perfect waves with no people. It's like the dream. And we obsessed over it so much. I would let my friend drive my pickup truck, and I would literally sit in the passenger seat, and with like binoculars, I'd be looking at the coastline, seeing if there was an untouched, unmanned surf break that we could claim and we could have our own. We would make it famous. That was our goal. We were pioneering while skipping school. So, there was a spot that we had been lucky enough to catch that was like from the road. There's two roads in Mexico. As you go down to and from Ensenada, there's a toll road. My family calls that the new road. You pay tolls on it. It's like guarded. If you get a flat tire, there's like Mexico calls them the Green Angels. It's like AAA. They'll help you like fix a flat if you get, many people don't know that service exists. When you pay the toll, you're afforded that on the new road. The old road, or the non-toll road, or the libre, the free road, is super sketchy. It's been sketchy since probably the day it was like paved, but it's not patrolled. It's got like nobody works on it, so when you hit a pothole, your car goes into it. It's not like, you lose an axle on it. But that's where all the best access points to the beach come from, is the old road. And my dad always told us, Mingo, do not go somewhere where there are no people. That is like a recipe for danger, a recipe for disaster. But we didn't listen because we were late teens or early 20s. We didn't care. We just wanted to like surf a place that nobody had surfed. And so we find this perfect, what looks like untouched surf, head-high waves, and I see like an access point for the road. Pull off, go through some bushes to get to like what feels like a dirt road that's real sketchy. We drive all the way down to the beachfront, and it lands us on like this. It's not sand, it's like all shells. And it's like the remnants of probably what are like, I'm guessing maybe generations of like abalone fishers, like shellfish fishermen who have beached their boats. They've unloaded all of like the harvest that they have, and then they bounce. They boat away to wherever they live. And the thing that was left there are these mountains of beautiful, like, translucent, multicolored abalone shells, and just this picture-perfect beach break or surf break just for us. And I'm like, this is the best spot. I don't even know what it's called. It's not on the map, but we're going to surf our brains out today. So we throw everything in the car, lock everything up. We go surfing. Not 15 minutes maybe into my surf session. From here, maybe just a little bit farther to the lobby. It's not even like a far paddle, which is like golden. If you get big waves and a short paddle, you're so stoked. Another car comes, slowly driving down the dirt road, and just so conveniently parks like right next to my truck. And I don't think much of it. I just keep surfing because you don't ever get waves with just you and two other friends just rotating in and out of waves. And I see in the car there's three people, two people, a guy and a girl get out, and they're enjoying they're enjoying the beach, taking like a leisurely walk. They do one long, slow lap, and I'm like surfing, and I'm just like, oh, look at that couple. That's so cute. That's awesome. They're just loving the beach as much as we are, catching waves. They get back into the car, they drive away, we get out of the water, 45 minutes, an hour later, we're just gassed, super tired, enjoyed the mess out of that beach. It was so fun because nobody was there, surfed it all to ourselves. When I pull up to my truck, I realize the driver's side door is like open. Oh, that's convenient. And then as I go looking for like the pants to change out of my clothes, my towel, I realize there's nothing left in my truck. Like my cab is completely emptied out. All my clothes, my wallet, our cell phones. My friend who was coming down, he was like super sketchy on going to Mexico in the first place. And he brought his like acoustic guitar, bless him. My buddy Ross brought his guitar, and he wanted to, I don't know what he was thinking. He's like going to play songs about Jesus on the beach or something. And that guitar was stolen, and like that was a ministry thing. Somebody had given it to him. He had a fantastic voice, and that was like the guitar that he led worship with. And I just felt robbed. Literally, I felt so angry at the situation, the scenario. I felt angry that I didn't listen to my dad, angry that somebody had taken advantage of good kids not doing anything wrong. And when we like kind of got like two and two together, we realized like I don't even have clothes to drive home in. So we, all three of us like stooges, just climbed into the truck. I had my key. I had packed my key in my wetsuit, like this part of your wetsuit, you know, like instead of what I typically put it like just under the bumper, which it's kind of like you either put it there or you put it in your wetsuit. For whatever reason, the Lord's graciousness had me keep it in my wetsuit. So I'm driving back to furious. I'm so infuriated. I'd never experienced that much anger in my humanity ever. Not just because I was robbed. I felt angry because my friends who were good people, they were robbed. And they were robbed of things that were really valuable to them. And I remember driving home thinking like, if I see the car, the same car, because I remember the car, and if I see the people, because I was close enough to see the people, I'm going to take vengeance in my own hand. I'm going to T-bone this car. I'm going to get in and like, I will be vengeful in a degree by which I actually like almost ashamed to think of what was running through my mind at the time. I never went back to that beach break. I never surfed that beach ever again. That's why we call it the Mirage, because it looked like it had everything we dreamed of, but it left us with nothing. We went back through the border, and I remember being in the border checkpoint, and the guy was like, passports, please. And I was like, look at us, we're in wetsuits, bro. Like I was so frustrated. And he's like, you're going to need a passport if you're going to get through back home. And I was like, we're going to be here for a while because you obviously don't see the situation we're in. The guy's like, straight to secondary, buddy. So I went to secondary because I had a mouthy lip. My friends were like, thanks a lot, we're going to go to jail. And I was like, no, we're not. You're dumb. We're not going to jail. I remember making a phone call to my dad, and my dad coming and rescuing us. He like went and talked to like the border patrol, and he was like, these aren't illegal immigrants. They're just dumb kids. And I remember being so full of shame. I felt shamed. I felt dumb. I felt taken advantage of. And I was thinking through this story because the text today has this digging into the concept of grace. And grace is like miles in the sky. It's on another planet when you compare it to the idea of justice and mercy. By definition, justice is like when something goes wrong, it's getting what we deserve. That's what justice is. Justice served would have been like me seeing those individuals. If I would have caught those individuals, I could have delivered them to like the local authorities. justice would have been served out that way, or I would have had two good buddies, and if we would have measured us against them, we could have taken justice into our own hands. It's getting what they deserve. They robbed from us. We're going to do something to them. I was hoping justice could be served that day, and it never came. Mercy is an interesting one. Mercy is actually not getting what we deserve or not getting what they deserve. So mercy played out in this storyline feels real icky. Mercy would have been like this. They're in the middle of taking things out of my vehicle, and I come upon them, and I go, oh, it looks like you have my jeans and wallet in your hand. I'm wondering if actually you need that more than I do. Because the truth is, I got a bunch of pairs of jeans back at home. So why don't you just take it? Just do me a favor and the next time, just don't do this again because it's not favorable and you're going to run into somebody that's not going to be as merciful as I am in this moment. And while you're stealing my phone, let me just get you the pin so you can access all the features on it too, right? Like that would be mercy. And mercy doesn't feel right when you are somebody who's being wronged. And I'm sure every one of us has a scenario where you've been wronged, where maybe mercy was on the table, but you're like, not today, honey. That's not going to be my response. I'm not reaching for that one. Grace is beyond my humanity. Grace is defined as getting what you don't deserve, getting what we don't deserve. Grace in this storyline would have been me showing up, them in the middle of emptying out the cab of my truck, me realizing that that's not their stuff, that's my stuff. And as I come to the scenario, I go, oh man, yeah, this is awkward. You're stealing from me. Those are my jeans that you're now taking. That's my cell phone, my wallet, my identification. But it looks to me, I'm looking at it just for what it is. Maybe you need a little bit more than I do in this moment. I don't know why you're taking, but maybe there's some family stuff that you're hoping you can sell some of my stuff for. Maybe there's more to this picture. So I'm going to let you keep the jeans. I'm going to let you take the phone. And here's the deal. Instead of you moving all this stuff from my car to your car, I'm just going to give you my truck. And then you don't have to move it. You can just take my truck. It's already got all my stuff in it. You don't have to rip the stereo out. Nobody's going to enjoy that. Just take it, and actually on the way up the hill, if you give me a ride in the back of my truck, now your truck, I'll fill it up at Pemex, and then you guys can be on your way. That sounds stupid, right? It sounds absurd that anybody would do that. And yet, that's the definition of grace, where they deserve justice. You're robbing. There's a penalty for that action. There's mercy that says, hey, don't do it again. I understand. Then grace is this otherworldly thing that says, although you are doing something you know is in the wrong, you're going to be given blessings on top of it instead. And Jesus is going to invite all of us to explore the concept of grace. And he's going to not just have you observe it, he's going to invite you to come practice it. But the crazy thing about grace is that I think when Jesus is saying this, we're going to jump into it in Matthew chapter 5. It's literally right where we picked off last week. So we went through mercy last week and we stopped and we said, that's a lot. We got to take communion because I don't know if I can get there in my humanity. He takes us another step deeper. He takes us farther into the depths of following him. And he goes, I want you to experience something called grace. And I'm going to explain it. And my gut tells me you're not going to be able to comprehend it until you see it lived out. Jesus, I think, is giving us breadcrumbs to this wild idea of grace because he's going to display the most grace ever in and through the cross. He is going to exchange brokenness and sin for life and restoration and reconciliation on the cross. But he's going to start to detail it in the conversations with the people that are in proximity to him. That's what I think we stumble into in this text. And I'll be frank with you, it's not fun. I was wrestling through this, and I was literally thinking through all the ways that I ought to be graceful with some of the pending turmoil with relationships that I have in my own life. And I was like, I got to pass this. Somebody's got to take this from me. I can't take this right now. But I understand this is where God wants us to be. This is where he wants us to go. So we're going to dive into this. Matthew chapter 5, verse 43. It's for me as much as it is an offering for you this morning. He says this, Jesus says, "You've heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you'd be acting as true children of your Father in heaven." Interesting, that statement alone. There is a desire for you to emulate, to reciprocate, to be the mirror of your heavenly Father. The characteristic of God is that he is full of grace, that he's full of compassion and mercy. And Jesus' desire for his listeners is that they would be mirrors of that mercy and that grace also, which is why he says this. In that way, you'd be acting as true children of your Father in heaven, for he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you're kind only to your friends, how are you different from anybody else? Even pagans do that. The word pagans there mean non-Jesus believing people, not Jesus practicing, Jesus pursuing folks. It says even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, before that word perfect triggers like some undealt with counseling in your world from expectations on your parents or from your parents, that word to be perfect means that you're supposed to be whole, complete. There is a desire that God has for you to experience wholeness and completeness in your person, the way he says God himself in his nature and his character is whole. He is complete. His desire is for you to feel like you're not missing anything. And he's going to create that wholeness through the understanding of how we navigate love and hate, things that we enjoy and then things that rub us the wrong way. And for context, culturally, when Jesus says, love your neighbor, you've heard the law say, love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. Just to be clear, there are no laws in Jesus' time that say, love your enemies. He's actually speaking to kind of like a street code that exists amongst people in their own neighborhood in this chapter. If you have neighbors in a first century setup this way, here's how your neighbors would have arrived there. It's not like you have neighbors today. A mother and a father would be together. They would have children to afford those children space as they grew up. Everybody lived under the same roof, but as your children grew up and got married and met significant others, they would add on to the home space for living for children as they grew up and they got married. Then, when those kids had kids, they just added to the space so that it became your neighbors were actually true bloodline family members. It was like, my children live here, my kids live there. We're all connected by some central bloodline in us. And so Jesus is saying, it's easy to love the people who are connected to you. It's easy, for the most part, to love those who are bloodline. I'm going to challenge you to go a little bit farther. So even if you have differences in your family, by the time it comes to dinner time, nobody doesn't eat. Right? You're going to have friction in your family unit, but you're not making anybody sleep outside. This is what it looks like to love your neighbor well. And Jesus is challenging this. He's saying the culture suggests that if it's not your bloodline, then you don't have to care about them at all. It's really about keeping and caring for your own kin. That's how actually my grandparents' home was built in Ensenada. The picture I showed you of the gate, and everybody came and talked to me. How come you didn't show the inside? It's irrelevant. They're all beefed up about not showing the internal workings of our own private home. When my grandfather built that house with my grandmother almost like 100 years ago, they built it out of adobe brick. They made the adobe bricks themselves. They made a small home. It was a small parcel that they had built for themselves because it was just my grandma and my grandfather. No central ventilation, no air, no heating, like a local internal like potbelly stove, cook on top of the stove. That was the simplicity of the home. But then my grandparents being like rich, devout Catholics, they had many children, 11 in fact. They had 11 kids, sons and daughters. And so my grandfather, every time they had a new child, made space connected to the home for each one of those children. So you go from 1 bedroom to 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, 5 bedroom, 6 bedroom. We're running out of space. So we go up 7 bedroom, 8 bedroom, 9 bedroom. Now we can double them up now because I'm getting tired and I'm getting old, so I can't build more bedrooms. I'm going to make space by building bunks and bunks and bunks inside the space. Our home is a home that reflects the generational impact that happened through my grandparents. And as my aunts and my uncles got older and they believed that it was their time to go, my grandpa was like, culturally, no, you're not. You're not going from here. I'm going to build you a house on this property. You will get married and you'll come back here. Right? That was like culturally, because my dad had 9 sisters. So the goal was not that they would move away and be connected to another life. They would stay and they would raise their family on that property. So there are homes for each of my aunts on that property because his expectation was that this was going to be the place that you raise your kids, that you grow and you develop the extended look of what our family looks like. That's very much in alignment with what Jesus is pointing out here. And he's saying, here's the challenge is when somebody who's not your bloodline starts impeding on your space, you get into these friction moments, you get into these challenges and disagreements, and what you've decided, because it's not blood, it's not family, that it's okay to do whatever to protect your own, and at the whatever cost it is to those people. And so they start impeding on your space, you do what it takes to push back on them. If push comes to shove, let push go to shove. Jesus is saying, actually, I want to take us deeper than that. I want you to understand what happens in this call to love, but what we have to manage in our hearts, which is oftentimes rooted in hate. And I'm going to try to deliver us out of those things, what Jesus is inviting his followers to do. And so I think I can identify, at least from first century and 21st century, where we find ourselves, commonalities between these things. The first, in understanding like the brokenness inside of us, I'm going to call it hate, and understanding how love and hate exists in our world today and how Jesus calls us through it. The first is this idea of like surfacey love and hate, surfacey love and hate. These are like shallow expressions. They're very superficial. I'll give you examples of them. Like, I love eating tacos. I love it. It's not the same love that I have for my wife, but I do love tacos. If it's an option between any other kind of food, I'll choose tacos. I chose it a bunch this week, just to let you know, confession-wise, right? I went to many places and ate many tacos this week alone. I love when I get a good parking spot at Costco. That to me is like God's favor on my life. I don't park with the expectation to park far. I park with the expectation that the good Lord is going to open up something close. And it usually happens. And Fallon hates it. She's so frustrated by it, right? She's like, I don't know how you do this, but please can you drive so we can get a good parking spot? I love when I get a good parking spot at Costco. You know what else I love? And it's so shallow, but I don't care. I love the show Love is Blind. Sue me. I love it. I love like the problematicness of people being matched together and the camera following all the drama. I love it. It's shallow and it's superficial, but I could say that I have a fondness for it. You want to know the things I hate? Shallowly at a surface level, you know what I hate? I hate waking up early in the morning. I think it's from the devil, right? So like, it's the worst. I cannot stand it. My children wake up early, and to be a responsible parent, you got to get up earlier than your children. That's like a thing. And so like, I hate having to peel myself out of bed early in the morning to manage the chaos of my children. It's just not fun. I would say I hate that. Another thing I hate going to the gym. It's so dumb, right? It's just so frustrating. Like a bunch of people, all this, the mirrors. Like I feel out of place. I would rather lift pews and walk up and down hills holding rocks than find myself in a gym, right? And John has been my best friend for God knows how many years, and like he's always trying to get me to go to the gym, and I'm like, dude, we're different people. Like, just let it go, please. John told me this week he's been going to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning, and a weird part of me was jealous, but then I was like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Go be friends with whoever's up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I don't care. Find me at the taco shop. That's where I'll be your friend, right? I hate going to the gym. See how that's surface? You could take it or leave it. There's an inverse to that. There's a deep hate and there's a deep love that we wrestle with in our humanity also. I have a deep love that's very different than my love for like tacos and good parking spots. This is the love that I have for my wife. The love that consumes me when I watched her birth 2 of our 3 children. Like, that's crazy. When I go, you took that on, you went through that. I am blown away. I could never do that. I love you for how you championed not just your life, but their life. You cared for yourself well. That is a deep love. I love what's happening here in this space. I love going through life with other people. I love pointing people back to Jesus and going, don't look at me because I'm a bad example, but I could give you a person to focus on. And I love going through life together with other people. There's I feel satisfied in that journey together. We have, the same way we have deep love, we have deep hate for things, and it's very real. I wrote in my notes, deep love can be embodied in pain unaddressed. It can be sometimes passed from generation to generation. You don't know why you hate or you don't like as deeply as you do, but oftentimes it comes passing through to you from a generation behind you. An example of this is my dad growing up in Ensenada. They had neighbors where they had beef between them. There was like a discrepancy on where the property line was, and as my dad's dad was like making space for all of his children, that neighbor was making space for all their children. They literally came colliding into each other's property. And my dad was a young child when his dad, my grandfather, got into a dispute. And I don't know the details of it, but it was either physical or it was so verbally like intense that it led to them needing to be pulled apart by other people. This is my grandfather and that neighbor. When my dad was a child, he watched it, and he watched the child of that dad kind of go at it together. So as my dad grew up and both our grandparents passed away, my dad still held that animosity, that deep hate for that neighbor's dad, and it transferred to that neighbor's son. So then my dad, a son, and that son, they hate each other. They still hated each other through their 50s. There was a point in time when they were both grown men still feuding over something that happened between their fathers. And that guy came and like drilled and packed and stocked the sewage line at my grandparents' house. And then my dad was like, oh, you don't do that. Like, my dad knew exactly who was like at the root of that. And my dad was like, I'm going to go clip that guy's electricity. And it was like a feud back and forth between. That is what deep hate looks like. You don't even make space for understanding. You just go, I know you did something wrong here. I'm giving it back to you. And if you give it back to me, watch out because it's going to come back twice as bad. Literally, only up until recently. My dad's in his like mid-60s at this point. My dad is like resolved that was not his pain to me. That was not a dispute between my dad. My dad has actually let go of a lot of that and actually become a much healthier person because of it. But man, there were some years when I was a kid and I was like, is this going to be mine to manage? I don't know if I have it in me. I'm not good at cutting wires, Dad. Like, this is going to be tough. Deep hate and deep love exist in all of us. And then there's like this weird middle. There's a false love and there's a false hate that exists amongst us even today in a big way. This is what false love looks like. I'll start with false hate. This one's easier. If you have children who are in college or teens in high school and they bring home an interest of theirs, right? They bring a love interest home and you look at that person with like great suspicion and you go, ugh. I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just saying be cautious, right? Have anybody ever had that conversation? What in turn happens is this reaction where they go, oh, you hate him. You hate me too. I knew you didn't love me, right? It's like this slingshot return where the interpretation of your great care is actually your great hate or your lack of love for what their choice is. Does this make sense? So where you actually love much, where you care much, they're hurt or frustrated, and so they interpret it as hate. It's false. It's actually deeply concerning. It's rooted in much care and much concern, but they see it as a front or a threat, so they call it hate. Does this make sense? It happens 100 ways in our culture today. There's the inverse of that is false love. It's so hard to catch this one, but when Fallon and I were newly married, we were in an apartment that had an extra bedroom. And I remember this person coming to our kind of world and saying, hey, wow, you guys are so much fun to be around. I've just really enjoyed kind of being connected to you and the friends that you guys have, and it's just so life-giving, and I just happened to like lose my apartment like last week. Do you think that maybe like if nobody's using that spare room, we could get into that spare room? And I remember us going like, yeah, you seem like a loving, good person, and they made their way into something they needed, right? They needed to cover something for themselves, very self-serving. The minute they had provisions that were better than what we had, that person was like, poof, gone, right? So it was like a false love. Like they were in our lives because it was something that served them in that moment. But the minute they found better, or the minute it was inconvenient, like we said, hey, could you like cover part of the food bill? I mean, you're always in the fridge, and that's weird because it's our fridge. Could you help with that? They were like, oh, I can't believe you'd even say that. And it reveals a false affection, a false love. All of these categories, surface love, surface hate, false love, false hate, deep love, deep hate, Jesus envelops all of them, and he's going to bring them under the conversation of grace. It's going to get real hard. This is what Jesus says. He says there are reactions to people that we define as our enemies. And in real time, he would have been saying, there's a group of you listening to me today where I know when you are hurt, your response is that you violently retaliate. There is a violent retaliation that comes, and sometimes it's physical, a lot of times it's verbal, sometimes it can be emotional. You guys are like waging war on each other, like emotionally and verbally, and it's not okay. There are a group of people who are believers in the first century called zealots. The zealots are so gung-ho for how and what they believe that when the Roman Empire or soldiers or anybody who's not a believer comes in opposition of them, they meet fire with fire. They're like the extremists of the like first century believer. There's one person who is described as a zealot that Jesus brings into his core discipleship crew, the 12, and Jesus makes space for him, which is really interesting because at the same time, Jesus brings in a guy named Matthew, and he's a tax collector, original Jew who's turned on his own people, and he's like, guess what? Y'all are going to be some friends now. And it's going to be challenging. And we're going to experience this thing called mercy and this thing called grace. And it's going to be above your pay grade. But in me, you're going to experience it first. And then through me, you're going to give it to one another. It's going to be hard. Reactions to our enemies, at least in Jesus' day, would have included violent retaliation. The second one would have been passive victimization. Right? You would have just said, man, there's nothing we can do about it. Like we're here and we can't afford to get farther away, so we're just going to take it on and we're just going to pray that eventually it stops. And I just hope you can make it to the other side. Both of those, Jesus is like, that's actually not what I want you to do. I don't want you to respond in a physical altercation, eye for an eye response. I don't want you to just be passive and be victims in a scenario where you're experiencing pushback from enemies. Actually, I'm going to describe to you this saying, active love. I want you to understand what active love looks like. And this is the better choice that Jesus brings us to, the way that we can react to our enemies. And this is where it's really challenging for me personally here today. I've been in like an interesting zone with Nico's school. I'm gonna let you in on like the most petty but personal but real-time effect of how this bounced off of me this week. Nico may have at one point in the last month poked another kid in the eye, okay? Like it happened. And like I got a phone call from Nico's teacher and said, hey, there was like a thing, boys were going at it. Nico decided instead of like using his words, he used his finger and he caught him in the left eye. And he's okay. He's like just fine. He's not going to need an eye patch. We're not going to need surgery, but just letting you know, I've also called the other parents. And so instantly, because you don't want to be the person who's got like an eye-poking kid, right? You go like, dang it. So I remember I'm going to class, and I'm trying to like befriend kind of all the parents. And like kindergarten zone is like volatile for a parent, right? You don't want your kid to be off, like you're going to start being like the rough and tumble kid. You want to be copacetic with all the other parents. And so as I've rolled in, I identified the kid that got poked in the eye, and I see the parents, and I'm like, oh man, I want to be your friend, because that's, the kids are kids, but we're not that way. And I can't even tell a story because we're like live streaming this service, but I'm going to say it anyway. So that parent has been giving me like ice, cold shoulder, like ever since. Like I'll roll in and be like, oh, hey, what's up? And he's like, like that. And I'm like, dude, I'm sorry, your kid can see. Like he's good. Like I clip my kid's fingernails short now so that nothing can happen. It's good. And I've been wrestling with this, like, you're not making space for me. And it's becoming a thing, at least in my mind, because he'll get to the school first, and then he's like having special time with the teacher, but he blocks me out, right? So like, then I'm trying to have like cool time with the teacher, but he's like, not here, bro. I see you. And I'm like, I'm cool. Let's be friends. No? Oh my gosh. So now I'm sitting in passive victimization. I'm wondering like, I'm going to poke this dude in the eye, right? Like I'm thinking all kinds of stuff in my humanity. It's bad. It's rough. And like, then I'm reading the Bible. And he's like, hey, I got some things for you in this moment. And I'm like, it's petty, Jesus. It's not big. I'll just make friends with other cool dads. And he's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. I want you to do some hard work here. I want you to think about what active love looks like. Jesus in Luke chapter 6, it's hard. Jesus in Luke chapter 6, he says, but to you who are willing to listen, because it's a hard thing he's about to say, he's going to match some things that are done to us with things that we can do in return. Okay, this is like a pairing. Jesus is playing a great pairing game. He's playing a very specific thing for us right now. He says, for anybody willing to listen, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. That's 1. Bless those who curse you. That's 2. And pray for those who hurt you. 3. This is going to take a lot out of me, Jesus. And I think there's a reason why he brings these pairings together, and I'd love to walk through them. Because the truth of the matter is, if you can find yourself in your humanity with Jesus' power doing any of one of these 3, I'm gonna balloon all of them under love your enemies and then categorize these underneath them. I think that's how it was spoken. So he's like, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who hurt you. The way that he's dropping these down are invitations for us to examine where we have friction in our friendships, where we have friction with people who maybe were once friends that we have distance now, unspoken, unfinished, unresolved things, or people in our life that we don't even want to engage in. There are people, I'll start at the end, there are people who have hurt you in real time, physically, emotionally. And I don't think Jesus is asking you, he's very wise, Jesus. He doesn't say, hey, go give them a big hug. Because there's hurt that's been associated at a moment or two. He's not saying, get in there and do good things, like get close, because he knows you'll likely get hurt again. And that's not the desire of a good God, is that you would repetitively find yourself in hurt situations. But you know what he does tell you? Hey, from a distance, you can be authentically prayerful for that person. You can pray my presence over that person. And I know they hurt you, and I'm working on healing you. But you can spend part of your time in prayer covering that person, that my presence would actually make its way authentically into that person's world by your prayers. See what Jesus does there? It hurts, and it's no fun. But he says, I'm actually willing to do repair work in both of your worlds if you would be mature enough to see who's hurt you and then pray my spirit in that direction. That's a deep maturing space that he invites you and I to. The second one in reverse is bless those who curse you. This is like anybody who's spoken poorly about you, your character, your work ethic, the things that make you who you are to the people who know you best. When somebody curses that, they speak falsely against it. Jesus says, can you drum up out of yourself the ability to bless that person? That you can speak something good while somebody speaks something negative or bad? Can you draw up a blessing for somebody who speaks poorly of you, if it's accurate or not? Maybe you were caught in it was a bad Monday, and you were showing the best of your humanity. When somebody just highlights and magnifies it and multiplies that thing that they saw you or experienced from you, Jesus is saying, hey, in pursuit of me, could you bless those who curse you? And then thirdly, at the top of the list, can you do good to those who hate you? There are people that you have difference with, that you don't agree with. That there is a disconnect in your ability to be friends. And I'm not asking you to be good friends, but I am asking you to do good things. What does that look like? It's frustrating because I'm wrestling through this and something as petty as like kindergarten dad to kindergarten dad. What does it look like to do good? What does it look like to bless? What does it look like to pray for? And then I was thinking, maybe he's praying for us because my kid hurt him. So like maybe that's happening in my zone, that he's actively praying for me. I don't know, but wouldn't that be amazing? That like while we're wrestling through this, he could actively be praying for my heart, and then here I am wrestling through these things, and then God is reconciling this whole scenario so that he gets glory in the end. That would be a trip. So there's this final thought, and I want to give it to you with a great verse to close this entire conversation down. The final thought is that we can only love like God when we know how we've been loved by God. Okay, we can only love like God. We can only emulate what we think is the depth and the riches of grace and mercy when we know how we've been loved by God, that God has actually bestowed. He's given us all of these things already, that we wouldn't be drawing from an empty cup. We wouldn't be drawing from a dry well, but Jesus would have poured all of that onto us already. We've been the receivers of great mercy. We've been the recipients of unbelievable grace. And because we've been on the receiving end of it, now I have something that I can drum up to bestow out. That's the idea here, that you can love like God when you know that you've been loved by God that same way. And Paul says it really well, the Apostle Paul, in the book of Colossians chapter 1. It's one set of verses. It's actually two verses together. I broke it into three parts, and I'll finish with this thought, and we'll worship together, because it's the only way that we can end on something that's so above our pay grade, this idea of grace. It says this: "This includes you who were once far away from God. You were his enemies, separated from him by your evil thoughts and actions." We'll stop there, break right there. For anybody who surrenders their life to Jesus, you're a friend of Jesus. Jesus says that I make space for you. You're a part of my family. I create room for you in my Father's house. But until the day that you find yourself in a surrendered posture, you're actually categorized as an enemy of God's. Your sin separates you from being connected in relationship to him. There's no gray middle zone for humanity here. As much as I want there to be, there's not. Scripture says, surrendered to Jesus and God, you are his friend. But if you are yet to surrender, you categorize yourself as enemy. You do not work with him together. You're in opposition. Your sin separates you from him. And Paul is saying that all of us have been found there, but some of us have found the grace to surrender. He says, in that, yet now he has reconciled you to himself through the death of Christ in his physical body. You are afforded mercy by Jesus' death on the cross. That's justice paid. So justice is paid. Your penalty for sin is covered in the cross. Mercy is bestowed upon you because Jesus takes it. But then here comes grace flooding in. It says, as a result, he has brought you into his own presence. 1, into God's presence. And 2, and you are holy and blameless as you stand before him without a single fault. Anybody wake up this morning just like a big breath of lunged air, like, I feel holy and blameless and without flaw? Anybody? No, you don't feel that way. You never feel that way. You want to know why? Because your feelings lie to you. Scripture says with great clarity, if you've surrendered your life, God himself, no matter how bad your week has been, sees you holy, blameless, without fault. How? How does that happen? Jesus has you, his own sacrifice between you and the judgment, the eyes of God. And so when God looks upon you, he doesn't see you in your flaw. He sees Jesus' sacrifice, and it covers you if you accept it and surrender to it. So that you're never seen with flaw or with sin or with brokenness. He sees you whole, complete, perfected, the same word that we started with. It comes when you surrender. So here's the beauty, is you can wrestle through mercy. You can wrestle through administering grace. And while you wrestle in your humanity, God sees you perfected if you've surrendered to him. It's such good news. Because, man, there's a lot of brokenness and bitterness stored up in us. There are people who have hurt you, who have hurt people that you love, and you want to deal with that. And Jesus says, there's a better way. It will make you whole. It will make you as you were designed, and it's through the vehicle of grace, through the vehicle of mercy. And it's not easy, but that's where I step in. So here's what I want to offer us as we close, and I'll bring the band up on this thought. I wrote just 3 questions for myself, and you could write these for yourself. How can I see myself as God sees me? How do I do that? That last verse, holy, blameless, without flaw. How do I see myself the way that God sees me? I get it out of this. I get it here. The second one is, how do I see the challenging people in my life the way that God sees them? Oh, that's hard. But I do it the same way. The more I understand the goodness and the nature and the character and the person of God, the more I can digest things like grace and mercy for the people who rub me the wrong way. And then lastly, how can I see God for who he really is? Full of justice, full of mercy, full of grace. I want to pray for us because it's a deep well we've all drawn out of, and then we'll close with worship together. We'll put our focus back on Jesus. Let me pray. Jesus, thank you for your word, and thank you for your invitation of something that's just so challenging, Lord, but I know I need it. Lord, I cannot begin to give mercy and to give justice, to give grace, until I understand how much you've given it to me. Mercy and mercy, grace upon grace. So Lord, for some of us, I think we need to sit in being the recipients of that, to be reminded that we're not fatally flawed, Lord. We're covered by you. But then, Lord, there's lots to wrestle with. There are people in our worlds that we can name with great clarity that it's been difficult for us to put on the table grace and mercy. And Lord, would you walk with us in that? Would you meet us right where we are, and then we would take steps from that place closer to you in pursuit of you? Thank you for those words, Lord, that you see us and you see in us the capacity to reflect the character and the nature of your dad. Would you meet us in a real way today, Lord? We love you. In your name I pray. Amen. Would you guys stand with me as we close with this song?